Thank you for joining us. My name is Edward Donald. I'm an e-commerce specialist for UKTI. And this afternoon's presentation is both a look at the market today, a look at where things may be going in the future, and also some practical considerations around, the sort of operational decisions that may be relevant for your companies, and in particular how UKTI can provide its selection of products and services to assist you in your export plans and delivery. So the title of today's presentation is Accelerating UK Exports Through Digital Commerce and Digital Marketing. The reason why I've emphasized the word digital twice is that the moment a retailer or a brand begins to export overseas, it is by its very nature coming into contact with a new audience, and fortunately, through digital communications, it's now possible to have not only a more efficient in financial terms level of communication with that audience, but you can also have a more regular one, a deeper one, and hopefully the sort of relationship where repeat purchase and onward recommendation is made possible by the consumers and customers that you've acquired. So turning now to the next slide, 2013, 2014 certainly will continue to see the rise of mobile, and in particular mobile in the role of purchase and in search for product. And this therefore leads me to talk about a number of trends on a worldwide level that we see through UKTI via our embassy colleagues and the network that UKTI has available to yourselves. So the first thing is that we're seeing exponential growth in mobile ownership and the use of mobile devices. So that's tablet and mobile phones. And with that, the continued expansion of both Wi-Fi and 4G infrastructure. And the reason I just want to pick up on this is that there are certain countries in the globe where at the moment Wi-Fi is just coming into play or is gradually being expanded. Indonesia is an example of one of those markets. And I think it's really important to have an eye on these particular regions, because where that technology infrastructure comes in and is then married to device ownership, you then get a real increase in consumer online behavior. And that is around buying such things as mobile phone credits all the way through to clothing, medicines, and even education and that type of thing. So needless to say, therefore, in that environment where smartphone is the go-to product, it isn't about a youth-orientated thing or an income-led thing. Lots of people of all sorts of generations and ages are owning smart devices. And it is the device that people go to when they want to go online. They don't really go to the desktop computer any longer. Some people may go through televisions and that type of thing, but it's definitely the mobile device that is the go-to device. And because there is more infrastructure, because more people own these mobile devices, we are seeing much more consumer search, we're seeing spending increase, and there's every evidence to say that in China, ever since the device and the infrastructure situation has come together, the consumer spending has literally taken off. It's sort of bypassed the need for people to go to shops, because in China you can't travel 2 or 3 time zones necessarily to go and see something, yet you can on your screen, and that makes purchasing so much easier. So this is altogether a bigger market, and the important thing is it's a market where the consumers look for things on their own terms, they buy for things on their own terms, and they also recommend things. And therefore that word of mouth, that reputation that you build with people is very, very important. Turning now to the last 2 points, cross-border trade, CBT, as you may well hear it referred to, is here to stay, it's going to grow, and with it all the infrastructure that underpins it. So payment services, shipping services, credit, all that type of thing. And indeed consumers are now very, very familiar with the fact they might live in Australia and buy on a UK domain, or they might live in Germany and buy on a UK domain, for example. So there's a real reshaping of a lot of the rules that used to be in place perhaps a few years ago. And one of the biggest things to draw your attention to is the arrival and the continued growth of e-marketplaces, or as some people call them, digital malls. Examples of these are Amazon, eBay, Tmall, for example, out of China, Graze Online in Australia. Overall, there are about 200 worldwide. Now, these are both a sales channel. As sales channels alone, they represent a huge opportunity. But they are also marketing platforms. And the key thing here is that they bring in an audience, and that audience buys product, but also shows behaviors around product, which gives analytical data, which can help you then market back to them in a more sophisticated way in the seasons and months ahead. So they offer you two angles into a market, one sales, the other marketing, and both are underpinned by a very, very sophisticated analytical database operation that you can tap into. So that was this year, 2014, for example. I just want to look ahead slightly to 2015, 2016, and just stimulate or perhaps provoke a little your thinking about what could come in the future. And here I have a visual of a pair of glasses with a set of icons on it. And the icons are very similar to those that you would have seen perhaps on a smartphone, but they are, instead of being a foot away in your hand, they're 2 inches away potentially from your eyeball. And that proximity is quite an unusual thought to think about, because we're all familiar with trying to sell advertising on a screen. We're all familiar with merchandising goods in store. We're familiar with merchandising goods on a website and that type of thing. But in the future, that will almost be blinkered out by people, because what they'll be seeing is in front of them. And as they walk through this hall, for example, they might get a sign that triggers them to a coffee bar 200 yards away or something like that, which removes the need to have lots of other signs. So it's going to be a very, very different environment that we move into. And some of the words that we hear associated with this are societal shift, and that can mean all sorts of different things. But I think it's fair to say that as consumers spend more and more time online, that behavior will only be expanded and further changed by the fact there are different devices they're going to be coming through online to view things through. So I don't have a crystal ball, but UKTI has a lot of data at its fingertips, and we are also in the privileged position to be able to talk to some of the big data providers like Google and Amazon, for example. We're also able to talk to some of the big brands and understand what they're proposing. And through this very varied network, begin to build a sort of mosaic-like view of what could be coming. And so this slide is really a synthesis of the conversations I've been having with various people over the last 2 to 3 months, and also reading what's in the public domain. And the first thing is really around the fact that mobile device growth is really rocketing. It's going to start appearing in markets where at the moment it isn't even ready. So we're thinking here about the African subcontinent, for example, and areas like Indonesia that I mentioned earlier on. And then over the top of that, you will then see the arrival of wearable technology. And I think a couple of points to note here are that it will be, due to its price point, quite a premium experience to own wearable glass or a Samsung watch. But the important thing is that the early adopter group who will probably buy that wearable technology will be very vocal about the performance in their life and that type of thing. And that's the feedback the manufacturers will be looking for. On the other hand, the fact that maybe they are beginning to consume content and marketing material from brands in a different way should hopefully stimulate companies to think about how they can adjust their communications to serve this particular audience that's increasingly using wearable technology. So the first thing I'd like to just underline is have a look out for everything to do with wearable technology, and have a look out for the way brands and companies, retailers, are beginning to adjust the way they communicate using that particular channel. Because the technology is the channel, whereas the media owner was the channel before. So it's Google Glass instead of the outdoor hoardings in front of the railway station, for example. The next point is that the new technology infrastructure I outlined earlier on will come through even more swiftly in new markets as they come on stream. Perhaps it's in a way to try and crystallize this, where we had analog lines, then we went to mobile in the UK, and now we've gone to smart devices. Some of these regions in the globe can just jump straight to smart device. So it's a phenomenal sort of surge in terms of technical capability that they are now being able to access. And it's very exciting to suddenly be able to view all these different products and brands over these devices. So where this takes us to overall is more online customers around the globe, a bigger online marketplace, and with it then the expansion of the facilities to service that. So that's expansions in terms of shipping, marketing, pay gates, for example. Needless to say, that's generating interesting business for the likes of trademark lawyers and copyright specialists as brands now begin to look across multiple markets and to manage their portfolio. And the same thing applies whether small, medium, or large. Any company going now abroad needs to really, really think not about its representation in terms of how it may have had a distributor before or a license agreement. It now needs to really get to grips with how it wants to strategically go into e-markets and e-commerce as a whole. Because the world is flat when you look at e-commerce. Yeah, there are 200 platforms potentially you can go onto. That isn't about having a distributor into one geographical market. That's about having a very, very joined up approach to how you deal with certain categories across the globe using a variety of different e-marketplaces. So then into e-marketplaces in a bit more detail as I've begun to talk. They are all about growth. They are about growth from the point of view of audience numbers coming into them. They are about growth in terms of the volume and the value of trades that are taking place onto them. And also, as we look further into the future, probably a lot more consolidation in that category. An example might be how a platform in Japan called Rakuten is a big player in the domestic Japanese market, but it also is in Singapore and Malaysia, and now is beginning to make inroads into the China e-marketplace category. So bit by bit, over the next couple of years, we'll probably see quite a few changes at regional and pan-regional level amongst those e-marketplaces. So whilst that's the marketplace, as people begin to use more and more smart devices, as they begin to receive more and more targeted communication from brands, I think that more and more of us here in the room will begin to think increasingly carefully about how much we value the data about our behavior. And I'm offering you this thought not only as a consideration for how you market and design products, but also how maybe you interact with companies that want your data. Because at the end of the day, the big players like Google and certainly the mobile device operators, so Nokia, Sony, and those guys, they are increasingly holding a lot of behavioral data in their hands, either through the device that you own or how you behave online. And that's great commercially if you can tap into it, but also individually, perhaps gives us pause for thought as to how we now begin to offer data to other people and what we might want to exchange it for. It's worth bearing that in mind. So I'm just going to finish this slide with the main point I'd like to finish with, which is that whereas in previous scenarios, retailers and brands may have thought they wanted a direct consumer relationship through their shops, maybe through great merchandising, in-store service, or alternatively, other service providers wanted great relationships through the telephone operators that they have in place. In the future, the primary route to the consumer is going to be through the screen of the device that we use. I can't lay my hands on my phone at the moment, but anyway. Imagine really that the consumer is viewing everything about your brand through the screen of their tablet or their mobile phone, or maybe to a lesser degree through the television. Yeah, I think that's a really, really key thing to bear in mind, because that should now begin to mobilize, make you think about where your budget is going. Yeah, are you spending as much on digital as you could be spending? Are you considering how your website is performing on a mobile device versus how it's performing on a laptop? Some simple things like that, which I'll come on to talk to a little bit later on. So that's enough about the sort of theory, if you like, and what the future might look like. What I want to do now is try and give you a perspective from two large brands. They're in the apparel and accessories sector, but I thought these two quotes were particularly valuable for today's session, because one is about the opportunity through digital. The other is really a call for change, which I think needs to be seriously studied by people as they begin to export. So taking the first, we have Cambridge Satchel Company, which I'm sure everyone here is familiar with, a brand that has taken a fundamentally English story and made it work in lots and lots of markets worldwide through interesting range planning, very creative and sophisticated use of digital media, and a real adherence to the quality of its product. And so here you have a view, which is that nowadays a brand based in the United Kingdom can have access to the worldwide base of consumers, tremendous global reach, and that digital enables them to do that. So you have a real sense that their eyes are very open and they're looking all over the piece as to where they can take their business. So that's a very stimulating position, and hopefully that's encouraging for other businesses to see that a relatively small entity a few years ago has really moved on to be a well-known brand and is still moving in that direction with global aspirations. The other quote here looks at things from a more operational perspective, and notably from marketing. So here, whereas in the past, a brand, a company may have had just one website and looked to move all its consumers into that domain, what is happening now is that companies are having to work out what content, so in other words, what pictures, what films, what text, what copy is in what channels to get the right communication going with their consumers. And it's no longer about sort of, if you like, trying to work out a consumer journey that just goes to a website. The question is how to work out that consumer journey that goes to all sorts of digital channels, all of which make up the total picture of how somebody begins to consider buying a product. And I think the key thing here is that Neil Sampson isn't talking so much about content, especially for a website, or content, especially for a mobile website. What he's advocating here is that when marketing, companies look at their budget, they look at where it's all got to go, and they work as efficiently as possible to get the coverage across all those channels to maximize the return on investment. And I think that's a massive change that when I was working within consumer brands had begun to see. I think that's a massive change that's going to continue to roll through in companies of every single size in the United Kingdom. So if that was the companies, now this slide is about the consumers, or the people who we want to be engaging with and talking to. And I just thought, for a bit of fun, I'd turn things on their head and have a thought bubble instead of a visual, and just try to draw together some strands of thought that we've been reading about, and I expect you're very aware of in the blogs and that type of thing that you read. I think the first thing is that people can search wherever they are and whatever they like, and if you like, it is very much on their terms when they begin their search, how they complete that search, how they then fulfill that search with additional information. So the tables are very much turned. It's the consumer behavior that's now going to drive whether you are found or not. Yeah, SEO, search engine optimization, is probably not the only answer. You'll have heard this a million times before. The important thing is people are searching on their own terms and coming into brands in ways that are very different from a couple of years ago. Equally, they can buy in any number of ways now. They can go on an e-marketplace where they can find the same brand as on that website, or they can go in through a retailer. So the choice is expanding, the way people search is expanding, and with that, lots and lots of behaviors underneath are shifting as well. So then how do you target people who are moving around so much? Well, I think the first thing is that they edit a lot of advertising out. So this begins to get us into a very interesting area, which is around content. It's around how to influence what is called the peer-to-peer conversation. So when somebody's bought your product or your service, how you can begin to culture that conversation and get them to talk about it to their friends and their immediate networks. And I would really like to sort of stimulate the debate around the use of content, notably content being correctly tagged so it can drive search for your product. And I'll just talk about that in a little bit more detail here. If I buy an A4 ad that goes on the back of an in-flight magazine, for sure I'm getting a certain target audience and I'm hoping that they're going to read my ad. If, on the other hand, I put that money into making a 2-minute film that goes on a YouTube channel that's nicely presented and linked to my company, as long as I tag that video correctly, given the trends that are in place, you will get a much better return on investment by putting it into content, i.e. moving content, rather than to a static ad on the back of an in-flight magazine, for example. Now, I'm not here to argue, if you like, to the final 10% how to spend a media budget, but what I want to do is just tease apart the fact that content, and notably moving content, so films, that type of thing, can really help people find your company in a much more natural way, because it's often moved around between people, than straight up advertising that people may edit out. So the last point really is on this slide is around the fact that people want to be they want to be entertained as they come into contact with companies. And I'm not saying that you don't tell the product story by any means, but what I'm asking you to do is just entertain the fact that in your companies, in your brands, you will have many, many stories. Maybe it's how something was developed, maybe it's how even the idea came about in the first place. And that is a potential hook as a platform that you can then use to sell your product through using video. So some of the best stuff literally is a very, very soft sell to get people into watching the video. And then once people are in to about 30% of watching the film, they then introduce the product or the brand and so on and so forth, and it goes on from there. And I think there's an awful lot that companies can gain in the United Kingdom by using content, by making sure it's correctly tagged, and not trying to sell directly through it, but using it to build some of the stories around their brand, notably pulling on things like heritage, maybe innovation, and perhaps regionality, for example. They're all cues that people are looking for overseas, for example, when they're searching. So on this slide, what I wanted to do was just have a walkthrough in a little bit more detail, some of the operational considerations that you can come up against when you begin to consider e-marketplaces. And I've said when you begin to consider e-marketplaces, not if, because you will, I'm sure, have heard how vocal George Osborne has been about the need for the United Kingdom to begin exporting. And indeed, UKTI, with Lord Livingston, who's our new minister, believes very strongly that the e-commerce message needs to be really, really grasped by English companies and executed upon. And so I'm just going to take this slide and walk it through in a little bit of detail to give you a few pointers around the considerations for e-commerce, and then take us through some sort of simple steps before rounding out with a wider conclusion on how UKTI can help you. So I think the first point is a fundamental commercial one, and this is that e-marketplaces, and what I mean by that is, for those who've come in a bit later, that's Amazon, eBay, that type of platform, and there are about 200 of them, I'll just re-emphasize. They offer brands and retailers a low-cost entry to an enormous group of consumers. And the important thing is that group of consumers, whilst being in a geographical area, is also in a wider geographical area than, say, a specific market like Japan. So I'm just going to illustrate that again by using Rakuten as an example. They target, through Rakuten as an e-marketplace, you could target Japan, Singapore, Malaysia, and parts of China. So hopefully what you're beginning to build here is, or come along with me here, is a sense that by going into e-marketplaces, they can become a really interesting building block for how you begin to export as a company. Because you can either go into them as part of a test market, so you could literally just assess whether you've got consumers in there, whether there's an appetite for your goods or not. You could go into an e-marketplace to complement your existing retail and distributor networks if you have them. Or what you could do is say, out and out, we're just going to go pure play e-marketplace straight from the get-go, and then we'll do a more classic retail route as a secondary route into market. There is no right or wrong, I think I must point out, but I think omni-channel, as the term that is used, I think it is incredibly important that we all get to grips with omni-channel and understand that within that there are variances, and the variances can suit businesses of all sorts of different sizes. The second point is that when considering e-marketplaces, you're beginning to enter a world that's a little bit different in terms of the way consumers shop, the way consumers pay for goods, and then the timeline when you get your payment back from the platform. And in this sense, every platform is very, very different, and each one needs to be explored in detail, because some are standalone, what they call ecosystems. So they sell your goods, they fulfill your goods, and they collect payment. So you have that group on the one hand. You have other e-marketplaces who just offer you the marketplace, but then you have to find the fulfillment company, decide which payment company you want to use, and which returns company you want to use. So I can't stand here and offer you a one-size-fits-all. What I can say, though, is that at UKTI, we're doing the analysis behind each of these e-marketplaces, and soon we'll be producing papers which will enable you to not spend so much time on the back end of the website of all these different companies to find out it all. We will layer out for you in very simple terms how much it costs to trade and the associated operating conditions that you'll have on each one of those. And that, in many ways, is what UKTI needs to do, which is to take the time burden out of the companies like yourselves who want to export and give you swift answers that are commercially up to date and relevant. But I just do want to emphasize that cash flow is an important thing, because whilst the appetite to really go and aggressively expand overseas is brilliant, nonetheless, fulfillment, cash flow, so on and so forth, are the lifeblood of your business. So I just wanted to raise that. So that then leads me on to the operational considerations around expansion overseas, because this takes us into areas such as management of inventory, stock levels, and returns. And I'll just talk about management of inventory and then returns in a little bit more detail. Some of these platforms will take the goods and they will hold it and they will fulfill from their warehouse port side. Others will ask that you ship it direct from the UK and they will then funnel it through to the consumer. Others won't do any of that and you'll have to fulfill the whole thing front to end. So strategically, depending on how big the production run is and so on and so forth, those sort of considerations need to be borne in mind, because until the consumer has bought it and you've got your money, that hasn't appeared on your bottom line. Yeah? So then turning now just to returns, this is often a topic that I find comes up in conversations, how to deal with the question of returns. And the answer is that for each platform there is going to be a solution that you're going to have to put in place with each one of them. But I think the really good news here is that the fulfillment companies are beginning to understand that they need to provide a service both into these marketplaces and also out. Yeah. So what we're beginning to see is some new, interesting, disruptive companies in the fulfillment space, and again, we can make those available to you through UKTI. People whose services are designed for the smaller entity, but also the people who they understand that you can't go 100% into a market. You got to test your way, and they want to help you on plan that approach. But equally, the larger players like Royal Mail and that type of thing, they've really got their offer much more streamlined now, so that they can help with outbound and inbound shipment. So then on to point 4 there, organizational, and this is I think this point is really informed by the fact that in a medium-sized company, in many instances, the marketing director and, say, the guy or the girl who runs the warehousing for goods, they may not talk very often. It's just the nature of their two disciplines. And what I'm proposing by saying this here is that actually all these different functions need to come together in a company and have a sort of central management structure to it that really, really understands that when you go into an e-market and you start to open it up, not only are you beginning a new consumer dialogue, but you're also beginning to engage in a completely new way of doing business, which is going to cause the company to behave in a different way. And so I think that what companies need to really, really think about when they begin to expand into e-marketplaces are, what are the key decisions they make and how do they communicate them across the business? And secondly, how are they going to plan for not only one e-marketplace, but also several marketplaces? Because the truth is, if you're going to go to Australia, why don't you go to Canada at the same time, for example? Or if you're going to go to Japan, why not reap the by also getting data on whether you have consumers in Malaysia and Singapore, for example. And it's that kind of lateral thinking and that slight spirit of experimentation that I'd like to encourage people to try and adopt, because the efficiencies and the cost savings that can come through it, I believe, are really, really worth planning for up front. And so then moving on to the role of data and optimization of budgets under the heading marketing. So I mentioned earlier on the data capture facility that these e-marketplaces have, which is phenomenal. Some of them take Google Analytics. Others of these platforms have their own software and analytics suites to harvest the data that they have. And I think, again, this may be a very, very dry topic, but it is crucially important to understand the value of this data to your companies, because it'll tell you what search terms people are using on a platform, which can then inform what words you buy for search engine optimization on Google, which may inform the sort of words that you use on some of your other channels. And if I stand back from that a little bit, if I explain that to go on an e-marketplace, you put a little bit of budget into marketing on the e-marketplace, so what your store looks like and buying a bit of traffic driving advertising. You then have your other budget that sits in the digital and offline domain. Having oversight of all that budget and understanding the return on investment between how it is performing on the platform versus how the budget is performing off the platform are going to be very, very important things to monitor. And where it's very hard to get data from some media suppliers, you'll get it in spades from the platforms, because they want you to trade successfully, they want more trade, and they will make as much of this data available to you as they can. For sure, there are certain service levels that you may have to buy into, but I really would like to underline the point that data should be at the heart of all your decision-making when you're looking at assessing e-marketplace performance. And so where that takes you to is the ability to optimize budgets. Not optimize in the sense of how much is my spend digital versus non-digital. This is down into the really granular nature of, is my SEO really working? Can I do test markets? Have I got the right tagging for my static images and my moving images? It can be very, very granular. But equally, it can be also around budgets for shipment. It can be also about whether your product line has performed successfully against the targets that you wanted to put in place. So I guess the core message here is that data is increasingly our friend, and there are more and more people who can provide that data to you. So then, almost to the last 2 points, really. In terms of communications, I talked earlier on about off-platform marketing and on-platform marketing. I think the thing here is that, again, it is a tendency for companies to plan, for example, a specific product push separately of their ongoing PR activity, for example. And having a presence on e-marketplaces and increasingly a wider presence in the digital channels overseas must surely prompt the need for a more organized view of how all this communication comes together. So I've used the term holistic planning, and holistic planning is really about understanding what activity you've got happening in your own media channels, so your own Twitter feed, your own website, your own Facebook page, for example. But equally, what's being said over the phone when somebody rings your office? That's your own channel. It's arguably your most important channel because it's a voice. So those are your own channels. They have a tremendous value already, and you can increase the value depending on what materials and messaging you put into them. Then you have your paid-for channels. So Facebook is a paid-for channel. If you have Windows in store, that is a paid-for channel because you're paying to merchandise that area. So understanding what that messaging mix is across those two is very important. And then crucially, in the third domain, which is called earned media, and earned media is classified as media that you gain access to either because your story is in it or, for example, your company is featured in it. That is earned media. You haven't paid to be in it, but you have come to be in it. And traditionally, it's under PR, but earned media is now such a vital part of the marketing mix that by controlling owned media and paid media, you can get much more control over your earned media mix. And I'm suggesting that by being much more holistic across those three different columns, you can significantly improve how far your budgets go and the effectiveness of what you're saying and doing. And so really to the last point around people in your companies, your employees, your fellow board members, that type of thing, I think it's in the future as more and more companies begin to understand this tremendous media power that they have. So all these digital channels that they own and run, I think it's very reasonable to take the view that more and more employees should be encouraged to talk about the products and the services and the brand they work for, because after all, they live it day to day, they understand the DNA of what's involved, and they often know it far better than some of the people who are out there selling it, for example. So again, as a sort of as a thought, as a consideration that I can offer you, I would like to recommend that companies look much more deeply at the sort of how they can use their employee base to engage them not only in the future of the company, but also in how they can be part of communicating that brand across digital channels and any other media that's available. And so just as I finish, I wanted to just offer some sort of quick guides. I didn't really know the spectrum of companies who I will be meeting here today, but hopefully this will be helpful. And needless to say, UKTI is here to provide some advice on a similar level, or we can go more broadly as and where appropriate. But I basically broke it down into 3 different sections, and this is really about being found. This is a fundamental in the digital marketing space. How do I get myself seen? And it isn't just about having the website, but it's about understanding how your website is performing. So what I'm recommending is that you have a Google Analytics account, and either yourself or ask somebody to get on it once a week, once a fortnight, possibly once a month, and really mine that account for data. It'll tell you who's coming from where. It'll tell you how long people are dwelling on your page, for example, how many pages they're going through, what the most popular one is, that type of thing. So again, it's all about the data. The fun might be designing the website and, all the visuals, but it's got to be about how it's performing, and it'll help you pinpoint areas to amend and to upgrade. I think the second thing to help you with that, and I'm not doing a plug for Amazon here, I'm just giving it as an example, but I think if you set up an account with somebody like that, and maybe initially Amazon in the UK or possibly a wee bit further into the European markets, if you set up that account and begin to trade on it, you begin to get a sense of what terms people are using to search for products that are either yours or similar. And by getting that data, and the platform will help you with it, what it will enable you to do is fine-tune the sort of terms that you're using when you're using search optimization and similar things like that. You may even find that there's a product that people are searching for that isn't made and that you can fill that gap. Who knows? But I think if I can help give one observation, rather than digital being perhaps a slightly strange world to get involved in, if you can get in, every time you take a step forward, you get a little bit of knowledge, and it'll help you inform the next thing that you do. And that, who knows where that may go? It may go towards developing an app. It may go towards developing something very, very different. But the point is, there's a lot of access to data that you can get free, and it can help you. So they're just 2 tools I wanted to bring to your attention so that consumers can help find you. So then, if they found you, or they know you already, but you're in the running with 2 or 3 other companies, so you're in the consideration set, the question then is how, that's good, but the question is how do you get there if you're not there? And so one of the suggestions I have is that you look at setting up, for example, a YouTube channel, or maybe a Vimeo channel, for example, and you invest strategically in content. And what I mean by this is that you put some money aside and find a company that is very, very good, that understands what content is. Yeah, not making just films per se, but content that it has a very commercial focus that is designed to drive brand consideration, and that is it can be tagged correctly, and also can be what's called managed correctly. Yeah, so in other words, launched out there and housed correctly on your YouTube channel. I think that's a huge change that could help companies by moving into content, because if you tag it correctly, it'll get picked up and viewed by very many more people. For sure, what the story is behind that content is down to yourselves to decide. But it will content isn't as expensive as it's often made out to be, and it's phenomenally effective because it can be viewed across the globe. So tagging the content is crucial to optimize your chances of being found. And when it's really, really good and amusing or very new, that type of thing, it will move on organically. You won't have to pay somebody to distribute it for you. It will be distributed by the people who like it. And that means that I am receiving it from somebody else, and I kind of endorse what they think. And it's very powerful when it comes from when it's passed on to you by somebody in your personal network. And then the last point on improving your global reach, and I have to finish on this point because UKTI is all about helping British companies export, and what we want to do is really, really encourage companies of all sizes in the United Kingdom to embrace the opportunity that exporting through e-marketplaces makes possible. So I would not be taking advantage of this podium opportunity if I did not say, please get into e-marketplaces. I understand that there are a lot of considerations that sit behind that, but it's very important that I make the message very clear that there is one or several marketplaces for you. And within that is then understanding the effectiveness of the on and off platform marketing. So this is how much money you put into marketing on an e-platform versus how much you put in to the marketing on the other channels that sit around it. That's just a key dynamic to understand there. And then look at the basket sizes that are coming through. Anecdotally, for example, just talking earlier on with somebody in the UKTI area forward there, the baskets are bigger in Austria and Poland than they are in the UK. Yeah, and I'm hearing that not just in apparel and footwear, but I'm hearing it in household goods and gifting and that type of thing. And so I just want to finish this slide by saying that McKinsey ran a report in 2013, and the top 5 performing categories worldwide on all the different platforms are as follows. It's sports and outdoor, apparel, footwear and accessories, home and garden, electronics, and gifting. They're the top 5 categories. Now, there are lots of other categories on these e-marketplaces, but if you have a product or a service that's in those top 5, I think it's really worth looking at e-marketplaces. And if you don't have a product in those top 5, don't worry. There will be a marketplace for you. Come to UKTI and we'll help you find it. So that's then where this comes in, which is our web address, or the new web address for the team that I'm in. I sit in consumer services within UKTI, and I'm part of a group whose remit it is to get UK retail brands across the food, drink, and retail space. We are here to help you export. And we've got a lot of experts in this team. We have fashion experts, food experts, retail experts, e-commerce experts, content experts, and we have access to 1,300 embassy offices around the globe and 350 international trade advisors in the UK. So we're not quite Google, but we are a massive resource that's here to help you. And we are not only clearly on email, but we are on the end of a phone. And thank you very much for your time this afternoon.